Watch this.
Oh, it's absolutely a win. The language from the Supreme Court was very compelling.
Arbitrary and capricious. That's what Idaho's highest court called the city of Boise's decision to greenlight Interfaith Sanctuary's new shelter. Of course, the neighbors are good with it, but what's the future for Interfaith? It may have taken a couple weeks, but Idaho's first shot at a school choice tax credit that actually might have a chance was unveiled to the public. But will this bill fit the bill, based on past failures and what the governor wants? Meanwhile, it may not mean much, but it does say a lot. Is Idaho willing to ask the Supreme Court to overturn same-sex marriage rights? Well, Interfaith Sanctuary's new shelter on State Street just got handed a significant setback by Idaho's Supreme Court. Oh, sure, construction may have begun nearly 2 years ago in the building, but that didn't stop the legal battle to stop Interfaith Sanctuary from moving from their downtown location in Boise to the West Boise neighborhood location that's west of Veterans Parkway. Almost from the beginning, the Veterans Neighborhood Association has opposed the move, citing safety and security concerns based on the number of police calls to Interfaith's current location on River Street. And there were other issues the neighborhood association brought up, like degradation of public spaces, a lack of infrastructure to handle a homeless shelter, and property value. But safety and security was top of the list. Well, then Boise's Planning and Zoning Commission initially denied the shelter's conditional use permit because Interfaith's application did not include a security plan. Then in February of 2023, Boise City Council reversed the P&Z decision and gave the shelter the go-ahead to move, but added on a list of 30 conditions to address the concerns. And that began the long appeals process by the neighborhood association. First denied by City Council, then getting no grace from a district court judge, and finally getting a hearing with the state Supreme Court in October of last year. Well, today, the court ruled in favor of the Veterans Neighborhood Association, saying the City Council's reasoning for the reversal didn't add up and, well, wasn't legal. In the opinion, Justin Greg Moeller wrote, Boise City Council simply disagreed with the P&Z Commission that the conditional use permit could be conditioned into compliance with the conditional use permit criteria. And according to city code, planning and zoning decision can only be reversed because there were mistakes made in the process, not just because City Council disagrees with it. And adding conditions, well, that doesn't make it correct. So Justice Mueller called the city's reversal, quote, arbitrary and capricious and based on unlawful procedure. So the reversal is now reversed, and they sent it back to the district court to fix their mistake. Veterans Park Neighborhood Association is obviously elated with today's decision.
It's so vindicating. I mean, this whole time we've expressed our concerns, I think, very reasonably and rationally, and been told that they didn't matter, even though the code says that they should. And the Supreme Court validated the last 4 years of our efforts. I think that it really is a relief in that sense. It feels very validating, and I think that it's a win for all of the citizens in Boise, you know, to hear that your rights mean something. They can't just be overridden because somebody says that it can help somebody else.
That was Veteran Park Neighborhood Association President Katie Decker. So what happens now? Does construction just stop? Does Interfaith go back to square one and find another location? Do they go back to square two and try to get approval again from planning and zoning? When we stopped by the State Street location today, construction was continuing. And we're still waiting on word from the city of Boise, who told us they were consulting with staff and legal team to find out what their next steps might be. Interfaith, though, they were also told us this afternoon they were trying to figure it out. And just moments ago, they did send me a statement. They didn't want to go on camera today because they weren't ready to clarify what they were going to say. But what they said was, Interfaith Sanctuary obviously is disappointed in today's ruling. Based on today's decision, we intend to petition for a rehearing, she says. This is from Jody Peterson-Steigers. As acknowledged by the City Council's approval, the services Interfaith Sanctuary will provide at its State Street location are necessary in our growing community. So we will continue our efforts to ensure the facility is available this fall to serve the most vulnerable among us. So that's their intent, is to continue with this project going forward and figure out how to legally do that with City Council. So we'll see when they do get some clarity. Maybe they'll have more words to explain to us on camera when they're ready.
Brown v. Board said that race cannot be the deciding factor in school attendance. I believe It is time in Idaho for income and zip code and disability status to no longer be either.
You know, we've been expecting this from day one of the legislative session, the introduction of a new school choice tax credit bill. The idea of giving families a tax rebate based on how much they spend on their kids' homeschool education or tuition to a private school, basically subsidizing private education with public money. Today, that bill was brought into light. Aspen, you were there at that hearing, and you listened to what Wendy Horman had to say about this. And my question is, we spoke to her on day one of the legislative session with her intent to bring this forward. Has that bill changed much? Is it pretty much the same thing she talked about that day?
Yeah, Brian, pretty much exactly the same thing. There really were no big surprises today when she decided to formally introduce her bill in the House Revenue and Taxation Committee. Now, while Idaho already allows families to choose where they want their student to go to school, Horman says the goal of her bill is to make more options available for families in lower income brackets. Idaho parents could soon get help paying for their children's education if you choose to enroll in a school that isn't public. The proposed law would give families up to $5,000 per student to cover private school costs, including tuition. For students with disabilities, that amount would go up to $7,500. Now, the program would cost the state $50 million from its general fund, and Horman says families who are below the 300% of poverty level will take first priority to these funds. She says her priority is choice and flexibility for both parents and educators. She says the state education standards aren't the way to ensure quality in education.
Don't expect to find all the rules and regulations on public schools, whether that's Idaho's expansive laws or federal laws and rules that apply to public schools. Don't expect to find that in this bill. This is a different approach, an innovative approach that allows children and teachers, candidly, flexibility to teach in ways that meet the personalized needs of each and every child.
If you don't have standards for education, for curriculum, for teacher certification, you can be sold a fancy product, but you don't know exactly what you're getting. And when someone knows that you just got $5,000 back in your pocket, and they'll say, hey, I'll sell you you can enroll your kid in my online academy, and it's only $2,500. What a deal! You know, it winds up putting you wind up putting another $2,500 in your pocket. This is not what education is about.
Idaho's constitution says the state must adequately fund public schools rather than school districts relying on local taxes. Idaho distributes funding to public school districts based on attendance. Representative Horman says any shifts in attendance would have minimal impact, but Representative Steve Birch, who we just heard from, says more families opting for private school could mean a drop in funding.
Let's take Boise, for example. If 10 students left, they would eventually, over time, lose that state funding, but their local funding would remain the same, thereby increasing their per pupil funding on the local side.
Public education is funded out of the general fund, which is revenue collected within, goes within that funds, education, transportation, and so forth. What this does is punch a hole in that bucket that will drain the available money for public education, which means that the only other way to make up for that money is through property tax increases through school bonds and levies.
Okay, before we go any further, Aspen, I have to ask you to clarify what Representative Horman said. So based on what she just said, that means that schools then have to rely on local funding when it comes to public or funding their public school?
She said it's an option. So when the attendance-based funding that we have less students in there, that means the per spending pupil amount gets a little bit larger because there's more money to spread among those students.
But that's not coming from the state. That's coming from a local levy that the taxpayers agreed to pay for.
Right.
That goes against the Constitution, it seems.
It does, and I tried to have that conversation with her, and I think maybe more of that debate is going to come in the hearing. Sure. She referred to that and said, let's talk about this later.
Okay.
We heard from Governor Little say in the State of the State address that any school choice expansion proposal would be two things: transparent and accountable.
Right.
Horman says under her plan, the State Tax Committee would publish updates on the funds and penalize those who misuse them. But Representative Birch said that's not enough oversight. Now, Brian, this really is just day one to this conversation, and there's multiple aspects of it going into it. You can talk about attendance-based funding. Where does local taxes come in? The committee voted for it to get a hearing. So more of that debate is going to come. Again, this was just an introduction.
And we don't know when. That could be a week, could be 2 weeks.
Correct.
But we'll keep you updated. All right. Thank you very much, Aspen. Well, for the second time in about 3 sessions, we saw a walkout during a legislative hearing. Back in 2023, House Democrats walked out during an emotional floor debate over trying to change Idaho's abortion ban. Today, this session, it wasn't lawmakers, it was, well, people in a committee. And they walked out over an issue that is just as emotional and controversial. Several people getting up, walking out, leaving the House State Affairs Committee as they were considering House Joint Memorial 1, essentially a strongly worded letter that they want to send to the U.S. Supreme Court, asking them to reverse the Obergefell decision, which is the one that gave everybody or gave same-sex couples the right to marry.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And this letter that they're sending, this memorial, is a strongly worded letter just to kind of ask about that. So here's the question. Why did they do this? What is going on? Well, the LGBTQ community in Idaho is worried because of really the implications here about maybe this doesn't change Idaho law today, but where is this headed? But the sponsor of the topic, Republican Representative Heather Scott, she framed this in a much different light than overturning same-sex marriage in the state of Idaho or anywhere. Representative Scott says she sees this as a big picture issue.
This memorial today in front of you is about upholding federalism and a state's rights to make our own decisions. It is not about defining marriage. It's about who should be defining marriage. When we have federal overreach like this, it further erodes our state's rights.
So others in committee talked more about the issue of same-sex marriage, and the memorial makes it very clear that is what this is about in the specific lens of states' rights, saying that the Supreme Court took away Idaho's rights to discriminate against same-sex couples, going on to point out that their perspective in detail, marriage as an institution has been recognized as the union of one man and one woman for more than 2,000 years. Democrat Representative Todd Achilles asked, where does the conversation end on this topic? Interracial couples, is that going to be targeted? He went on to make a financial argument, and others cut through the state versus federal issue to talk about what matters most to them. But we'll start with Representative Achilles.
When you look at the list, there's over 1,300 rights and benefits that couples receive from being married. We're effectively putting a tax on same-sex couples that opposite-sex couples don't have.
This act of sheer judicial hubris, which has purported to redefine and has effectively undefined marriage, which is the mechanism by which families are created. By virtue of that fact, I, as a private citizen, am required to endorse and support something that violates my freedom of conscience.
Not everybody believes in God. Not everybody who votes or pays taxes believes in God, and therefore I do not believe that we should be turning to God in a matter of morals and marriage.
By the way, if you are wondering, yes, that is Julianne Young. You heard from in that soundbite. She is now just a private citizen. There may be some confusion. She is no longer a state house representative. But, Brian, we did hear from her and others in committee for about 2 hours. Again, it passed on party line, as you can imagine. Yeah. Republicans voting for, Democrats against. We'll now go to the full House for consideration.
And just on some background here, Idaho's law already recognizes marriages between a man and a woman. But the 2015 Supreme Court decision, Obergefell, that basically nullified that. It's still on the books, though. So should they overturn it, well, then just like the abortion law, it triggers that one back into effect.
And there was action in Idaho that went from the district court up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, back and forth. And that basically mandated that Idaho had to recognize same-sex marriages that happened in a place like California. This is a topic, again, I think you said it best, that this memorial, it does nothing, but it does say a lot. Yep. And I already have heard from members of the LGBTQ community that say something like this is enough to push them and their families out of Idaho, something they don't want to do. They don't want to have to abandon their life here in Idaho, but when they see lawmakers talking about that, it makes people in those communities very nervous.
Be surprised how many people on that side of the argument, though, would be fine if they just up and left the state of Idaho. All right, thanks, Joe. All right, now that you've settled into the show, it's time to text us. We want to hear what you have to say about today's show or what you'd like to hear about in another show. Send us your questions, your comments, and your concerns. 208-321-5614. That is the number. And remember, include the hashtag #the208. Oh, and your name helps. That way, we know who it's from when we share it at the end of the show. we're starting to see a few more local impact of the executive order signed by President Donald Trump this week. First, the Lava Ridge project put on hold, and now delaying reunification of refugee families in Idaho. Abby Davis tells us more in today's 411.
This bill is not about whether death penalty is good or bad. Our job is to make sure it's carried out in the most efficient manner.
A new bill making death by firing squad the main method of execution in Idaho was introduced in committee yesterday. Representative Bruce Gogg says the firing squad is a much less problematic way to execute someone than lethal injection and would have less economic impact on the state. Now we're waiting for a public hearing on the bill. Governor Brad Little signed the Gone with the Lava Ridge Wind Project Act today as additional support for President Donald Trump's executive order suspending the project on Monday. Little's order makes sure all state agencies fully cooperate with a new analysis of the project launched by President Trump, including having state agencies participate in public forums so Idahoans' opinions are considered in the process. Another one of President Trump's executive orders changes the country's refugee admissions program, including a pause on refugee resettlement for at least 90 days. The Idaho Office for Refugees says normally Idaho welcomes about 800 refugees each year who are facing life-threatening persecution in their home country. But now they said the 500 people processed and approved to come to Idaho have to wait while the order is in place.
Some of those are family reunifications, which, that's the part that really breaks my heart.
The president will revisit the pause every 90 days and decide to extend it or resume the program.
It'll be something that our downtown users are going to be very proud to utilize.
Despite Trump's executive order, Boise is celebrating our immigrant history with a new park near the Basque Block named Kaisha Corner, which means welcome in Basque. The park broke ground today at 521 West Grove Street. The quarter-acre site will feature seating, lighting, and a small stage, along with public art honoring the area's multicultural roots. Construction starts immediately with plans to open in time for July's festival. A little update on Idaho's snowpack. Currently, it's 6% below average and not growing, which is abnormal for this time of year. 6% isn't too concerning, but some areas have lost snow, like the Little Lost and Henry's Fork basins falling into drought conditions. Persistent high-pressure systems have been blocking storms from reaching the state, and forecasters expect southern and central Idaho to remain mostly dry for the next 2 weeks. That's the 411 on the 208. I'm Abby Davis.
Well, that was peaceful. Now let's talk about the weather headlines. Tomorrow, I'm so sorry, especially after those gorgeous views. You're going to wake up to lows between 12 to 18 tonight. Tomorrow, they could dip down to the very low teens again. Now, in terms of the wind, we're looking at 13 to 15 mile an hour winds here in Boise tomorrow, and in Twin, up to 20 mile an hour winds. We also still do have a very slight chance of flurries, which I know most people are looking forward to. In Boise right now, we're sitting at 37. Our high today was 38. Twin Falls, 31. Sun Valley, 21, 23 in McCall, and here's a look at our almanac. So today we reached a high of 38, which is pretty seasonable for the average. Our average is usually 39. This morning, however, that's where the real difference came in. We usually sit at a low of 26 in the mornings. This morning we dipped down to 12, so very, very chilly. And most of this, again, is because of this high pressure center that's been parked off the west coast, creating those very dry, very stable, frigid conditions we've been going through. And unfortunately, it looks like it's going to hold steady for a while. If we get any snow, it'll be very slight. It'll be in the eastern and central mountains. Now tomorrow, your lows throughout the region, we're looking at 13 in Mountain Home, 16 in Nampa, 2 in McCall, negative 11 in Stanley, 17 here in Boise. Now the winds tomorrow, the winds are going to be windy. So again, we'll be sitting between 13 to 15 miles an hour, which really does make that wind, that chilly, that frosty Arctic air feel that much more brutal as you're walking around outside. Tomorrow, here's a look around the region. Boise with a high of 38. Sunny skies almost entirely across the board. McCall seeing partly sunny skies with a high of 28. 34 in Twin Falls. And here's a look at your 7-day forecast. Now, for the most part, we're sitting pretty with lots of sunshine coming through in the area. Tomorrow, we're going to see almost no clouds tomorrow, which is beautiful. Tomorrow into Friday, we could see a light breeze.
All right, thanks for all the messages today. We got a lot of them. Let's see how many we can get through here in the final minute of the show. This one from Bob says, just for curiosity's sake, I'd like to know how many of these legislators have their children in private schools that are pushing this bill. Quite a few, Bob, quite a few. I don't know the exact number, but there are a few, and they do have to declare that or call it a Section 8. I think I misspoke. I don't know what that's called. Anyway, something 80 is what it is. Rule 80, that's what it is. When are Idahoans going to stop electing people who don't listen? Taxpayer monies for public education, period. And the Boise State Public Survey poll also showed that 53% of people are opposed to any of these vouchers or tax credits or whatever when it comes to taking money away from public schools. So I guess they're really not listening right now. Seems to be no shortage of mean-spirited members of our legislature. They can't stand the idea of somebody living in a different kind of life than they do. How sad, says John. You know, marriage is a legal agreement. What does religion have to do with it, says Colin in Boise, or asked Colin. And even way back when, it was more of just an exchange of property, a way to kind of increase the amount of land or money that you get by exchanging vows with a family, sometimes in another part of the world. So that's kind of how that works. Who's ever been harmed by same-sex marriage in Idaho? No one, says Jack in Boise. We keep waiting for these bills that are going to come up that are going to help people. 39 bills so far have been printed in the House side of the legislature. Still waiting for some of those to be like, this is to help people, not restrict what they do. Had to laugh at Scott complaining about government overreach while promoting government overreach, says Kim. It's a good point. Well taken. We'll see if it's taken. We'll see you tomorrow.
Continue with us and watch free now on the KTVB Plus app everywhere you stream.